Tuition Mobile, quality e-learning experience on the go.
Pasture and forage crops. Pasture refers to an area of land covered with forage crops, which are usually grasses and legumes that are grazed or fed on by livestock such as cattle, sheep, and goats. Forage crops, on the other hand, are plants cultivated for their vegetative proteins and used in fresh or preserved forms for feeding livestock. Forage crops, as we earlier said, are used to feed livestock such as the cattle, sheep, and goats. Hay, silage, and straw are prepared from forage crops. Forage crops also serve as cover crops, which add nutrients to soil and control weed growth. They help to conserve soil moisture by preventing evaporation. They also help to prevent erosion. They also serve as green manure, and they are also used for roofing farmstead and also for bedding materials. We have two types of pasture: the natural pasture and the artificial pasture. The natural pasture is also referred to as a natural grassland or rangeland. In this pasture, grasses and legumes grow naturally on their own and are fed upon by farm animals. That is, grasses are not planted by farmers. Examples of natural grassland are the savanna areas of Nigeria. The natural pasture contains poor quality grasses and legumes. It contains soil types that are low in fertility. It has good regenerative ability. It contains wide varieties of grasses and legumes, some of which may not be eaten by livestock. Productivity of natural pasture is very low and resistant to drought. Forage crops in natural pasture can withstand trampling by farm animals. New growth is stimulated by burning. And also, natural pasture may contain some grasses which cannot be easily eradicated. The artificial pasture, which is also referred to as established or sown pasture, is the pasture where grasses and legumes are deliberately planted and managed by man to be fed on by livestock. Artificial pasture contains high quality grasses and legumes. Selected grasses and legumes are grown in adequate proportion. Artificial pasture contains no weeds except some shade trees. It can withstand trampling by farm animals, and it is properly managed for high productivity of the forage crops, for example fertilization, rotational grazing, and irrigation. Another characteristic of artificial planting is that it has high regenerative ability after being fed on animals. That is, it can generate itself after it has been fed on by animals. Common grasses and legumes of livestock and their botanical name. As you can see on the screen, we have common names of grasses, common names of legumes, and their botanical names. The elephant grass is known as Pennisetum purpureum, while the guinea grass is known as Panicum maximum, while the speargrass is known as Imperata cylindrica. The Bahama grass is known as Cynodon dactylon, while legumes such as the centro has botanical name as Centrosema pubescens, while the stylo has Stylostances gracilis as its botanical name, while the mucuna has Mucuna utilis as its botanical name. The kudzu puero has Puera phaseoloides as its botanical name. The others we can see on the screen. Factors that affect the distribution of pasture include the climatic factors, the soil or edaphic factors, and the biotic factors. In the climatic factors, The type of climate in an area influences the type of vegetation in that particular area. For example, Sudan type of climate favors the growth of grasses and legumes, while the equatorial climate does not. Elements of climate which can directly influence the distribution of pasture are rainfall, temperature, wind, relative humidity, day length, sunlight, etc. In soil or edaphic factors, this refers to the level of fertility of the soil. Fertile soil tends to support pasture growth, while poor soil does not. Soil factors which may influence the distribution of pasture are soil pH level, soil texture, soil structure, as well as the slope of the land, that's the topography. While biotic factors like diseases, pests, parasites, predators generally influence the distribution of pasture. The activities of man, such as bush burning and overgrazing, generally have adverse effects on the distribution of pasture. Factors that affect the productivity of pasture are persistence, aggressiveness, resistance to trampling, seed viability or profuseness, resistance to drought, pests and diseases, accurate stocking, and good management. Persistence is the ability of the pasture crops to survive and spread by vegetative means. Aggressiveness is the ability of pasture to compete favorably with other weeds. High aggressiveness ensures continuous availability of the pasture crops. Resistance to trampling refers to the ability of pasture to resist continuous trampling by farm animals during grazing and still remain available to livestock to feed on. In seed viability or profuseness, seeds of pasture should be viable over a long period of time. It should be easily propagated to ensure high pasture productivity. In resistance to drought, pasture which is able to withstand drought helps to maintain high productivity and ensures all-season availability of forages for livestock. In pests and diseases, absence of pests and diseases within a pasture ensures their increased productivity. And in accurate stocking, an accurate number of animals should graze a specified area of pasture. Overgrazing does not ensure increased productivity of pasture. In good management here, proper management practices such as regular weeding, roging, irrigation, good grazing, fertilization, etc. should be practiced to ensure increased productivity of pasture. Establishment of pasture. Before pasture can be established, the following factors must be considered. They include adaptation of species, palatability, compatibility, time of maturity, and life cycle of species. In adaptation of species, legumes and grasses should be adapted to the local environment. In palatability, legumes and grasses to be established must be palatable and nutritious for animals. In compatibility, the grass-legume mixture in the pasture must be compatible to each other. In time of maturity, grasses and legumes to be established should be able to mature within the shortest possible time. In the life cycle of the species to be considered, annuals with annual plants or perennials with perennial plants should be mixed together when establishing pasture. This is to ensure continuous availability of pasture. In the establishment of pasture, the sequence to follow include site selection, clearing of the land selected, removal of debris, cultivating the selected site, planting of pasture crops, supplying. By supplying here, plant materials that fail to germinate should be supplied with new planting materials. The next action that follows is planting of legumes. Here, Leguminous plants should be planted, especially in the case of grass and legume mixture. Promoting of tillering is the next step after planting of legumes. The grasses should be cut back at regular intervals to promote tillering. Weeding is done after promotion of tillering, fertilizer application, irrigation, and paddocking. In paddocking, the pasture should be broken into convenient units for good grazing management, like rotational grazing. Common management practices in pasture include burning, fencing, application of fertilizer, weed control, pest and disease control, and adequate stocking. Burning should be done once in a year, especially when the forage crops are over mature and fibrous. This is to encourage regrowth of the grasses and legumes. Fencing is the partitioning of the pasture into sections called paddocks to facilitate rotational grazing. Application of fertilizer in the pasture ensures rapid and succulent growth of pasture because of increase in the fertility of the soil. Weeds should be removed regularly from the pasture to prevent competition with forage plants for nutrients and space. Pests and diseases should be prevented and controlled to ensure rapid growth of pasture crops. In irrigation, pasture farms should be irrigated, especially during the dry season, to ensure the availability of fresh and succulent grasses all the year round. The correct number of animals should be placed on the pasture to graze. Overgrazing should be prevented if you want to ensure adequate stocking.